I was standing by the kitchen window when the envelope arrived. It wasn't anything extraordinary at first glance, just thick, cream paper with my name written in careful, deliberate script. But something about it made my chest tighten before I even opened it. Maybe it was the weight of it. Maybe it was the return address. Or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't been invited to anything by my son's family in years. "Agnes, are you going to let that tea go cold again?" Eleanor called from the living room. She had been my closest friend for decades, the kind of person who didn't need explanations. She already knew them. "I'm coming," I replied, though my eyes stayed fixed on the envelope. My fingers hesitated just a moment before breaking the seal. Inside was a formal invitation. Daniel Carter's graduation ceremony. My grandson. Stanford University. Honors distinction. I had to sit down. For a moment, everything around me faded. The ticking clock, the distant hum of traffic, even Eleanor's presence in the next room. All I could see was Daniel as a little boy, running across my backyard with scraped knees and a laugh that echoed through the years I had since lost. "They invited you, didn't they?" Eleanor said softly as she appeared in the doorway. I nodded, still staring at the card like it might disappear if I blinked. "Yes," I said quietly. "They actually did." She didn't smile the way I expected her to. Instead, she studied my face carefully. "That surprises you." I let out a small, dry laugh. "Of course it does." Because invitations had stopped coming a long time ago. At first, it had been small things, missed phone calls, forgotten birthdays, dinners I somehow hadn't heard about. Then it grew into something larger, something harder to ignore. Holidays passed without a word. Photos appeared online, smiling faces, vacations, celebrations, and I was nowhere in them. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, had a talent for making exclusion feel accidental. "Oh, Agnes, I thought Robert told you. We assumed you were busy. It must have slipped through the cracks." Always polite. Always perfectly reasonable. Always leaving me just outside the door. And Robert, my son, never argued. Never questioned. He would give that same quiet, apologetic look and say, "Mom, you know how things get." Yes. I knew exactly how things got. "You're thinking about not going," Eleanor said. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked back at the invitation, tracing Daniel's name with my thumb. He had always been different. Even as a child, he made an effort. Phone calls on holidays. Thank you notes written in slightly messy handwriting. Once, when he was 12, he had mailed me a pressed flower because it looked like something Grandma would like. That kind of thoughtfulness didn't come from nowhere. It certainly didn't come from Vanessa. "I have to go," I said finally. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Even after everything?" I stood up slowly and walked to the old cabinet in the corner of the room. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a small wooden box. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside was a watch. A classic, silver timepiece with a worn leather strap. My husband Henry's watch. He had worn it every single day of his life. Even in the hospital, when everything else had been taken away from him, he had insisted on keeping it on his wrist. Before he passed, he held my hand and said, "Give this to Daniel when he becomes the man I know he will be." I had been waiting for the right moment ever since. "This is it," I said quietly. Eleanor stepped closer, looking down at the watch. "He'll love it," she said. I hope so. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a gift. It was about something else. Something I had been missing for years. "I'm going to call and confirm," I said, closing the box carefully. "Just to make sure they're expecting me." Eleanor gave me a knowing look but didn't argue. The phone felt heavier than usual in my hand. It rang 4 times before Vanessa answered. "Hello." Her voice was sharp, controlled, exactly as I remembered. "Vanessa, it's Agnes," I said. "I received the invitation to Daniel's graduation." A pause. Not surprise. Not warmth. Just a pause. Oh, she said finally.
Yes.
Daniel wanted you to have one. Of course he did. I wanted to confirm I'll be attending. I continued, keeping my tone steady. It's very important to me. Another pause. Then, flatly, fine. I'll make sure there's a place for you. A place. Not we'd love to see you. Not we're glad you're coming.
Just a place.
Thank you, I said anyway. Is there anything I can bring? No, she replied quickly. Everything is handled. The ceremony starts at 10. Don't be late. And just like that, the call ended. I stared at the phone for a moment before setting it down. Well, Eleanor asked. Exactly the same, I said. But something inside me had already shifted. I don't care, I added, more firmly this time. This isn't about her. It's about Daniel. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then go, she said. And go as yourself, not as someone asking for permission to be there. I smiled faintly. That was easier said than done. Still, I began to prepare. I chose my best dress, simple, elegant, one Henry had always liked. I scheduled a hair appointment. I even polished my shoes, something I hadn't bothered with in years. If I was going to walk into that place, I would do it with dignity, not as someone who had been pushed aside,
but as someone who still belonged.
That night, I barely slept. Memories kept surfacing. Daniel as a child, Robert as a boy, Henry's voice echoing in my mind. And beneath it all, a quiet, persistent fear. What if nothing had changed? What if this invitation was just another formality? Or worse, what if I didn't belong there at all? Morning came too quickly. The drive to Stamford was long, giving me far too much time to think. By the time I reached my hotel, I felt both exhausted and strangely determined. I wasn't turning back. Not this time. The next morning, I arrived early. Very early. The campus was already alive with families, laughter, excitement, pride filling the air. It was impossible not to feel it, even standing on the edges of it all. For a brief moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to be part of it again. To stand beside my son. To celebrate my grandson.
To simply belong.
I held the small box with Henry's watch tightly in my hand. Stand tall, Agnes, I whispered to myself. And then I walked toward the auditorium doors. The morning air was crisp, carrying that quiet excitement that only comes with important days, days people remember for the rest of their lives. Families moved in clusters across the campus, dressed neatly, holding flowers, cameras, balloons. Laughter rose and fell around me like waves, warm and effortless. I walked among them, but it felt like I was moving through something that didn't quite belong to me anymore, like stepping into a photograph I had once been part of, but no longer recognized. I clutched my invitation and the small wooden box inside my purse, feeling its reassuring weight. Henry's watch. I had checked it 3 times before leaving the hotel, making sure it was still there, as if it might somehow disappear if I didn't. It was the one thing I knew I could give Daniel that no one could take away or rewrite. At the entrance, a young volunteer greeted me with a bright smile. Good morning. Which ceremony are you attending? Her voice was cheerful, untouched by the kinds of tensions I had learned to read between the lines of adult conversations. Engineering, I said. My grandson is graduating. Her smile widened. That's wonderful. Let me help you find your section. She tapped on her tablet, scanning the list. What's the last name? Carter. Daniel Carter. She nodded, scrolling. Here we go. Your family is seated in Section B. Those are the reserved seats near the front. You'll want to head through the main aisle and follow the signs. For a brief, fragile moment, something inside me lifted. Near the front, reserved seating. Maybe, just maybe, this day wouldn't unfold the way I feared. Maybe things had changed more than I thought. Maybe Daniel had insisted on something more than just sending an invitation. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than she could know. I walked into the auditorium, the sound of voices echoing softly against the high ceilings. The space was already filling, rows of chairs stretching forward toward the stage where the ceremony would soon begin. Section B was exactly where she had described, close enough to see every detail, every expression, close enough to feel included. I approached the usher stationed at the entrance of the section and handed him my invitation. He glanced at it, then at his list. His expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. Mrs. Carter, he asked. Mendez. I corrected gently. Agnes Mendez. I'm Daniel's grandmother. Yes, of course, he said quickly, flipping through a few pages. Just one moment. That moment stretched longer than it should have. I'm sorry, he said finally, lowering his voice. It looks like your assigned seat is actually in Section F, not Section B. I felt something drop inside me, like a quiet, inevitable weight. There must be a mistake, I said. I was told. I understand, he interrupted kindly. But according to our list, Section B is reserved for the immediate family group, and there's a separate seat listed under your name in Section F.
Separate.
The word echoed louder than anything else he said. I forced a small smile. I see. Thank you. He gave me directions, pointing toward the back of the auditorium. I followed them slowly, each step heavier than the last. The further I walked, the louder the distance became, not just physical, but something deeper, something familiar. Section F was nearly at the very back. Worse, it was partially obstructed by a large pillar that cut through the line of sight toward the stage. From certain angles, I would barely be able to see anything at all. I located my seat, F12. And then I saw it, a small white card placed neatly on the chair. My name printed clearly. And beneath it, written in blue ink. Better if she didn't come. My breath caught. For a second, I thought I might be mistaken, that my eyes were playing some cruel trick on me.
But no.
The handwriting was unmistakable. I had seen it countless times over the years, on holiday cards, labels, little notes left around the house. Vanessa. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the card. The words felt heavier than they should have, like they carried the full weight of every silent exclusion, every forgotten invitation, every moment I had been pushed just far enough away to make it seem unintentional. Ma'am, are you all right? A nearby usher asked. I nodded quickly, slipping the card into my purse.
Yes.
Just finding my seat. He smiled politely and moved on. I sat down slowly, my hands resting in my lap, gripping the fabric of my dress just to steady myself. Around me, people continued to arrive, chatting, laughing, sharing programs, and adjusting cameras. No one noticed anything unusual. No one knew. And that was the point. This wasn't meant to be loud or obvious. It was meant to be quiet, controlled,
Contained.
a message only I was supposed to understand. I stared ahead, though the pillar blocked most of the stage from view. My thoughts drifted, uninvited, toward the past. How many times had this happened before, just in different forms? A missed phone call here, a miscommunication there. Always just subtle enough that I could never quite call it out without sounding unreasonable.
Until now.
This was no misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Voices passed behind me, and I instinctively shrank back slightly, not wanting to be noticed. Then I heard them. Vanessa's voice came first, unmistakable in its tone. I can't believe she actually showed up. I froze. They were close, just a few rows behind me, walking down the aisle toward the front. I told you we should have just sent the invitation and hoped she wouldn't come, she continued. Robert's voice followed, quieter, hesitant. Daniel wanted her here. And Daniel doesn't understand how complicated this is. Vanessa snapped softly. She makes everything uncomfortable. Always has. I felt my chest tighten, each word landing harder than the last. She'll corner him, start talking about the past, about Henry, about things that don't matter anymore. Vanessa went on. Today is about Daniel, not her. Robert didn't respond immediately. When he did, it was barely more than a murmur. Let's just get through the day. That was it. No defense.
No correction.
Just acceptance. Their footsteps moved past me, continuing down toward the front rows, Section B, the place I was never meant to sit. I stayed perfectly still until their voices faded into the general hum of the crowd. Only then did I allow myself to breathe again. For a moment, just a moment, I considered leaving. I could stand up right now, walk out of this auditorium, and no one would stop me. I could drive back home, send Daniel a gift, call him later with congratulations. It would be easier, cleaner, less painful.
No humiliation. No pretending.
Just distance. My fingers brushed against the wooden box in my purse. Henry's watch. I closed my eyes briefly. You don't walk away from family, he used to say. Not when it matters. I opened my eyes again.
No.
I wasn't leaving. Not because of Vanessa. Not because of Robert. But because of Daniel. He had wanted me here. That had to mean something. I straightened slightly in my seat, adjusting my posture, lifting my chin just enough to remind myself who I was. Not someone to be hidden in the back, not someone to be quietly erased. I was his grandmother, and I had every right to be there. The ceremony began shortly after. Music filled the auditorium as the graduates entered, rows of caps and gowns moving in steady rhythm. I leaned slightly to the side, trying to catch glimpses between the obstruction of the pillar. And then I saw him, Daniel, taller than I remembered, his shoulders straight, his expression focused, but bright with anticipation. For a moment, everything else faded again, the seat, the note, the voices. All I felt was pride.
Pure, overwhelming pride.
That's my grandson, I whispered under my breath. And for the first time since I had arrived, I smiled. The ceremony unfolded with a kind of slow, formal rhythm, the kind that demanded patience, but rewarded attention. Speeches came first, carefully prepared words about achievement, perseverance, and the promise of the future. I tried to listen, I really did, but my thoughts kept drifting, circling back to that small white card now hidden inside my purse. Even without touching it, I could feel its presence, like a quiet accusation pressing against me. Still, I refused to let it take this moment away from me. I leaned slightly to the side, adjusting my angle around the pillar, straining to keep Daniel in view whenever possible. Every now and then I caught glimpses of him among the rows of graduates, his posture, the tilt of his head, the way he adjusted his sleeve just like Henry used to. It was strange how certain habits carried through generations, as if memory itself had a physical form. A couple sat down beside me, slightly out of breath from hurrying. The woman smiled warmly. We almost didn't make it in time, she said, fanning herself lightly with the program. These events are always more crowded than you expect. I nodded politely. Yes, they are. Who are you here for? She asked. My grandson, I said, and despite everything, my voice softened with pride. Daniel Carter, engineering. Oh, how wonderful, she said. Our nephew is graduating too. It's such a big day. She paused, then glanced toward the front sections. Why aren't you sitting with your family? The question was simple, innocent, and yet it struck deeper than anything Vanessa had said earlier. I hesitated, searching for something that wouldn't unravel everything right there. There was a mix-up with seating, I said finally. She frowned slightly, clearly not convinced, but polite enough not to press further. Well, at least you're here. That's what matters. I nodded again, though her words echoed in a way she probably hadn't intended. At least you're here.
Yes.
I was here, even if I wasn't meant to be. When the names began to be called, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations quieted, replaced by anticipation. One by one, graduates crossed the stage, each name met with cheers from somewhere in the crowd. And then, Daniel Carter. I stood up without thinking. My heart surged as I leaned forward, trying to see him clearly. For a brief second, he stepped into a gap between the pillar and the crowd, and there he was, walking confidently across the stage, accepting his diploma with a steady hand. I clapped. I clapped harder than I had in years, my hands stinging, my vision blurring slightly. "That's my boy," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the seat, not the note, not Vanessa, just him. When the ceremony ended, the auditorium erupted into movement, chairs scraping, voices rising, families rushing toward the exits to find their graduates outside. I remained seated for a moment longer, steadying myself, smoothing my dress, checking my reflection in a small compact mirror. "Stand tall, Agnes," I murmured quietly. I wasn't going to approach this moment as someone who had been pushed aside. I was going to meet my grandson with pride. I made my way outside, following the flow of people into the bright afternoon sunlight. The courtyard was alive with celebration, laughter, embraces, cameras flashing. It was overwhelming, but beautiful. And then I saw him. "Grandma." Daniel's voice cut through everything. Before I could react, he was already moving toward me, weaving through the crowd with urgency and excitement. When he reached me, he didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around me in a tight embrace that lifted me slightly off the ground. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Not from surprise. From emotion. "You came," he said, pulling back just enough to look at me. "I wasn't sure if you would. I wouldn't have missed it," I replied, my voice thick. "Not for anything." "Did you see me?" he asked almost boyishly. "I did," I said, smiling through the ache in my chest. "You were perfect." He laughed softly. "I was nervous the whole time." "Your grandfather would have been so proud," I said. At that, his expression softened. "I wish he were here." "He is," I said quietly, "in more ways than you think." Before I could say more, a familiar voice cut in. "Daniel." "Vanessa." She approached with that same controlled smile, Robert just behind her, holding a camera. Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, just long enough to acknowledge my presence, not long enough to welcome it.
"There you are," she said.
"We need to take photos before we head to lunch." Daniel turned slightly, still standing close to me. "Mom, this is Grandma." "I can see that," Vanessa replied lightly. "Hello, Agnes. I didn't realize you'd arrived already." I held her gaze calmly. "I've been here since before the ceremony started." A small pause. "Of course," she said. Robert stepped forward awkwardly. "Mom," he said, giving me a brief hug. "Good to see you." "You too," I replied, though the words felt thinner than they should have. "All right," Vanessa said, clapping her hands lightly. "Let's get a few quick photos. Just immediate family first." Daniel frowned slightly. "Grandma is immediate family." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Yes, but we'll include her in a few after." Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a small but noticeable change. "Why not now?" he asked. Before Vanessa could respond, a young voice interrupted. "Excuse me, Mrs. Mendez?" I turned to see one of the ushers from inside the auditorium. She was holding my purse. "You left this at your seat," she said. My heart skipped. "Oh, thank you," I said quickly, taking it from her. She hesitated, then added quietly, "I'm really sorry about what was written on your seat card. That shouldn't have happened." Everything stopped. Daniel's head turned sharply. "What note?" The usher's face flushed. I thought you knew."
"I'm sorry."
And with that, she hurried away. Silence fell over us. Daniel looked at me, confusion turning into concern. Grandma, what is she talking about? Vanessa spoke immediately. It was nothing. Just a misunderstanding with seating.
No.
Something inside me refused to let it be dismissed. Not this time. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said quietly. My hands were steady as I opened my purse and pulled out the card. I handed it to Daniel. He read it, and I watched his face change. The warmth drained first, then the confusion, then something sharper. What is this? He asked, his voice low but controlled. He looked directly at Vanessa. For once, she didn't have an immediate answer. Daniel, it's not. It says better if she didn't come, he interrupted. Who wrote this? No one spoke, and in that silence, the truth became undeniable. Finally, Vanessa exhaled sharply.
Fine.
I wrote it, but it wasn't meant for this. It was just a note while we were organizing seating. It wasn't supposed to be left there. Daniel stared at her. That doesn't make it better. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa,
What? She snapped. We've talked about this.
your mother makes things difficult. She always has. I do not, I said, my voice calm but firm. Years of silence pressed behind those words. I have done nothing but try to remain part of this family, I continued. Even when I was excluded, even when I was ignored. Daniel looked between us, his expression tightening. Wait, what do you mean excluded? Vanessa crossed her arms. Oh, come on. Don't act like this is new. She barely comes to anything. I wasn't invited, I said. That landed harder than anything else. Daniel blinked.
What?
I wasn't invited, I repeated. To holidays. To trips. To birthdays. That's not true, Vanessa said quickly. Then name one, Daniel said, turning to her. Name one event in the last 2 years where Grandma was included. Vanessa opened her mouth.
Closed it. Said nothing.
Robert finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. She's right. Vanessa turned to him, stunned. Excuse me? We haven't included her, he said. Not really. And I let it happen. The air shifted again. This time, there was no going back. The noise of the courtyard seemed to fade into something distant and hollow, like the world had stepped back to give space to what was unfolding between us. People still laughed, cameras still flashed, names were still being called, but none of it reached us anymore. We stood in a small, tense circle, held together not by celebration, but by something long avoided and finally exposed. Daniel was the first to move. Not here, he said, his voice controlled but firm. We're not doing this in front of everyone. He glanced around, noticing a few curious looks already drifting our way, and gestured toward a quieter area near a line of trees at the edge of the courtyard. Without waiting for agreement, he started walking. I followed. Robert hesitated for only a second before going after him. Vanessa came last, her posture rigid, her composure strained in a way I had never seen before. We stopped beneath a large oak tree, its branches casting broken shadows over the grass. It felt removed, almost private, though the distant hum of celebrations still lingered in the background. Daniel turned to face us. I want the truth, he said. All of it. Vanessa crossed her arms, defensive. Daniel, this is really not the time. It's exactly the time, he cut in, because whatever's been happening has been happening for years. And I didn't even know. His words landed heavily. He looked at me then, softer but searching. Grandma, you really weren't invited? I met his eyes. No, I said. Not in the way that matters. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I was included just enough to make it seem polite, I replied, but never enough to truly belong.
Calls stopped.
Invitations disappeared.
Plans were made without me.
And when I asked, there was always a reason. Daniel turned slowly toward his parents. Is that true? Robert looked down. Vanessa answered first. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, Daniel said. There was a long pause. And then something shifted. Vanessa exhaled sharply, as if holding something in for far too long.
Fine, she said.
You want honesty? Here it is. I never felt comfortable with your grandmother. The words were blunt, but not surprising. Why? Daniel asked. Vanessa hesitated. And for the first time since I had known her, she didn't look controlled. She looked uncertain. Because, she began slowly, from the very beginning, I felt like I didn't belong. Like I was being compared.
Judged.
Measured against someone else.
Ist sehr her.
Compared to who? I asked. She looked at me, almost incredulous. To Robert's father's first wife. Silence. Not the kind that feels tense. The kind that feels wrong. I blinked. I'm sorry, I said carefully. What are you talking about? Vanessa frowned, clearly confused by my reaction. Robert told me his father had been married before, that you came into his life after. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I turned to Robert. Is that what you told her? He looked up, startled.
No.
That's not what I said. Vanessa's expression shifted. Yes, you did. You said your father had a fiancée before your mother. Fiancée, Robert repeated. Not wife. They were never married. Vanessa went still. What? They broke off the engagement, he said. Before he met my mother. There was never another marriage. I watched the realization begin to unfold across her face.
Slow.
Unsteady. No, she said quietly. That's not how I understood it. That's exactly how it was, Robert replied. Mom was his only wife. For over 40 years. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. Vanessa sank slightly, as if something inside her had lost its structure. So, all this time, she whispered. I finished the thought for her. You believed I was someone else. She looked at me, not with irritation, not with control, but with something raw and unguarded. I thought you were judging me, she said. Every time you talked about the past, about your husband, about your life, I thought you were comparing me to someone I could never live up to. I never compared you to anyone, I said. I know that now, she replied, her voice quieter.
But I didn't then.
Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping again. So this whole thing, he said slowly, everything was based on a misunderstanding? No one answered, because there was nothing to argue with. That was exactly what it was. A misunderstanding. One that had stretched across years. One that had taken birthdays, holidays, ordinary afternoons, and turned them into absences. One that had quietly rewritten relationships without anyone ever stopping to question it. I thought Grandma didn't want to come, Daniel said, his voice tightening. Every time I asked, you said she was busy, or that she didn't like traveling, or that she preferred staying home. I felt my throat tighten. I never said that, I said softly. I know, he replied. Now I know. Robert stepped forward slightly, his voice heavier than I had ever heard it. This is on me too, he said. I saw what was happening. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't stop it. Vanessa looked at him, something like disbelief crossing her face. You agreed with me, she said. I avoided conflict, he corrected. There's a difference. That's convenient, she snapped, though the sharpness lacked its usual strength. No, he said. It's the truth. Daniel stopped pacing. We lost years, he said. Do you understand that? Years I could have spent with Grandma. Years she could have been part of our lives. No one had an answer for that. Because there wasn't one. I felt the weight of those years settle over me again, but this time it felt different. Not just like loss. Like something being acknowledged. Finally. We can't change what's already happened, I said quietly. But we can decide what happens next. Vanessa looked up at me. There was no hostility in her expression now. Only something uncertain. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. It was the first honest thing she had ever said to me. And somehow that mattered. You don't fix it all at once, I said. You start small. Daniel looked at both of us. Then we start now, he said. He held up his wrist, the watch catching the sunlight. I'm not losing any more time.
Neither was I.
For the first time in years, the distance between us didn't feel permanent. It felt fragile, like something that could still be rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, but truly. And for the first time since I had opened that envelope, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again.
Hope.
The reception felt different after that conversation, though nothing around us had actually changed. The same white tables stood beneath the open pavilion. The same soft music drifted through the air. The same clusters of families laughed and celebrated as if nothing complicated had ever existed in the world. But for us, everything had shifted. Not neatly, not completely, but undeniably. The truth had been spoken, and once something like that comes into the light, it refuses to disappear again. We walked toward the pavilion together, though together felt like a new and uncertain word for us. Daniel stayed close to me, not out of obligation, but with a quiet, deliberate presence that said more than any apology could. I could feel it in the way he slowed his pace to match mine, in the way his shoulder brushed lightly against mine as we walked, grounding, steady. Robert followed just behind us, and for the first time in years, I noticed something different in him too. He wasn't shrinking. He wasn't avoiding. He looked present. Vanessa walked beside him, silent, her expression unreadable, but no longer guarded in the same rigid way as before. It was as if something inside her had been unsettled, and she hadn't yet decided what to build in its place. We reached the table reserved for Daniel's family, and for a moment, I hesitated. Old habits don't disappear in a single afternoon. I instinctively expected to be directed elsewhere, gently moved aside, given a polite alternative that wasn't really an invitation. But Daniel pulled out a chair next to him and looked at me directly. "Sit here, Grandma," he said, next to me. There was no room for negotiation in his tone. I glanced briefly at Vanessa. She met my eyes, and for a moment, something passed between us, something uncertain, but not hostile. Then she gave a small nod. "Please," she said quietly. I sat down. It was such a simple action, something most people would never think twice about. But to me, it felt like crossing a threshold I hadn't been allowed near in years. The table filled in around us. Daniel's girlfriend, a few relatives from Vanessa's side, acquaintances offering congratulations, but the space beside me remained Daniel's, and he didn't let that change. Conversation began slowly, uneven at first. People asked the usual questions: what Daniel planned to do next, where he would be working, how he felt about graduating. He answered patiently, but every now and then he would glance at me, as if making sure I was still there, still included in the moment. At one point, his girlfriend leaned toward me with a warm smile. "Daniel talks about you," she said. "He told me you used to read to him all the time when he was little." I felt something soften in my chest. "We did," I said. He had a habit of asking for just one more chapter, even when he was already falling asleep. Daniel laughed. "That hasn't changed much." Vanessa looked up from her plate.
"I didn't know that," she said.
It wasn't an accusation. It was something else. A realization. "There are a lot of things we don't know," I replied gently. She held my gaze for a second, then nodded slightly. "Yes," she said. "I think you're right." The meal continued, and slowly, carefully, something like conversation began to take shape. Not perfect, not easy, but real. There were pauses, moments where no one quite knew what to say, but they didn't feel as heavy as before. They felt honest. After some time, Daniel leaned back in his chair and glanced at the watch on his wrist. Henry's watch. It fit him perfectly, as if it had always been meant to find its way there. "I still can't believe you kept this all these years," he said, turning his wrist slightly. "It was never mine to keep," I replied. "I was just holding it until the right moment." He looked at me thoughtfully. "I think he'd be proud." I smiled softly. "I know he would." There was a brief silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt reflective, like we were all sitting with the weight of what had been lost and what might still be possible. Eventually, Daniel excused himself to meet some friends who were calling him from across the pavilion. He stood, hesitated, then leaned down and hugged me again. "Don't go anywhere," he said quietly. "I won't," I assured him. As he walked away, Robert shifted slightly in his seat, then turned toward me. "Mom," he said. There was something different in his voice. Not the usual hesitation. Something steadier. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." I looked at him. Really looked at him. This wasn't the boy I had raised. But maybe, just maybe, he was finding his way back. "I know," I said. "No," he continued. "I mean it. I saw what was happening. I knew it wasn't right. And I still chose the easier path. I should have stood up for you." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You're here now," I said. "That matters." He nodded, though his expression remained heavy. "I want to do better," he said. "Then do," I replied simply. Vanessa had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke. "Agnes." I turned to her. She hesitated, clearly searching for the right words, something I had never seen her struggle with before. "I don't expect you to forgive everything," she said. "Not right away. But I would like to try again." It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. "That's all we can do," I said. She nodded slowly, as if accepting something she had resisted for a long time. "Maybe," she added after a moment, "we could meet next week. Just the two of us. Lunch, maybe. Start there." It was an unexpected offer.
An olive branch.
Not grand, not dramatic, but meaningful. "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it. When Daniel returned, the atmosphere had shifted again. Lighter this time, though still carrying the weight of everything we had uncovered. He looked between us, noticing the difference immediately. "Did I miss something?" he asked. "Just a conversation," Robert said. "A real one," Vanessa added. Daniel smiled faintly. "About time." As the afternoon began to wind down, people started saying their goodbyes, gathering their things, taking final photos. The celebration was ending, but something else had just begun. Before we left, I reached into my purse once more. "There's one more thing," I said, handing Daniel a small leather-bound album. He opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, years of them. Him as a baby, a toddler, a curious child with bright eyes and endless questions. And on the back of each photo, in Henry's handwriting, were little notes, observations, memories, love, captured in ink. Daniel read one aloud, his voice soft. "Daniel, age 3, insisted the moon followed him home. Wouldn't go inside until I promised it would still be there tomorrow." He laughed, though his eyes were shining. "I don't even remember this." "That's why we kept it," I said. "So you wouldn't have to." Vanessa leaned slightly closer, looking at the pages. "I've never seen these," she said. "There's a lot we haven't shared," I replied. She nodded. "Then we should," she said. It wasn't a promise, but it was a beginning. When we finally left the pavilion, walking together toward the parking lot, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. Like something that had been clouded for years had finally settled enough for us to see through it. Daniel walked ahead, his gown draped over his arm, the watch catching the sunlight with each step. Robert walked beside me, Vanessa just slightly behind. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was following from a distance. I was part of it. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. And that was enough. As we reached the car, I paused for just a moment, looking at them, my family. Complicated, imperfect, changed, but still mine. Stand tall, Agnes, I whispered softly. And this time I realized I already was.